We have with us Dimitri Shein. He is running for Arkansas's House of Representatives seat, and he's got a fascinating story. Dimitri, welcome to the program.
Hey, Cenk, it's Dimitri, and not Arkansas, Alaska, but
Did I just say Arkansas?
Yeah,
I know it's Alaska. You're running against Don Young, but
yeah,
I could, and I thought to myself, don't say Arkansas. Okay.
And I'm the nervous one, so don't worry.
All right, so is Don Young still going to run? He's 85. Is that the Republican in the race?
Yeah, he's still, spreading his bigotry and hate around up here. So yeah, he's still running.
Okay, he's been in office since 1972.
I want to say that, yeah, over 40 years.
Wow. Okay. So why bigotry and hatred? For the people that don't live in Alaska, what's Don Young all about?
He has said some racist things, and he has spoken out against our LGBTQ community, and he has said some pretty awful things about minorities and so forth.
Okay, now Dimitri, you're originally from Russia. Can you see your old house from your new house in Alaska?
The way that our government is actually disregarding our rule of law and the cronyism and the corruption, I am starting to see Russia from my house, yes.
Okay, I didn't see that coming. That was a nice twist there. Okay, so let's talk about the primaries for a second, then I want to get back to your personal life, which is fascinating. What's the situation in the Democratic primary there?
We have essentially two candidates who are kind of fighting for the primary to win the primary. There's me and my opponent. And I think it's getting close. I've just had a debate with her, and I've actually won the endorsement of the newspaper here that kind of sums it up. Yeah,
that looks like Obama's picture.
I was victorious in the debate, and it was a good deal. And I think the quote was that I have a clear message to defeat Don Young.
All right, excellent. And you guys came from Russia back in the day. At that point, but you grew up under the Soviet Union partially, right?
Yeah, I grew up in the Soviet Union, and my mother and I immigrated when I was 12, around 93, right at the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right. Do you remember those days?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I remember standing in the bread line with my grandfather. I remember the lack of heat, electricity. So yeah, I remember a lot.
Wow. And then your story is amazing. Your mom worked at Walmart, but then became an engineer. Is that right?
Yeah. So we immigrated to the United States. We fell on some hard times. We lived in a shelter for a while, and my mother, worked really hard. She worked at Walmart. She worked nights, and she went to college here, our local state college, University of Alaska Anchorage, and got her master's in engineering. And so she's now an engineer here working in Alaska.
And I see that you were an accountant. You worked and you started an e-commerce company. But one more thing about your personal life, though, so you adopted 4 kids in 2016. You already had 2. That makes 6. What happened there? Why did you just decide to adopt 4 kids at once?
It was kind of actually a long story. I'll try to sum it up. My wife was jogging on a trail behind her work, and she found a little girl who was running away from home. So all 4 girls were adopted prior, and the person who adopted them was abusing the kids, basically neglecting to feed them or not feeding them on purpose. So my wife and I became involved to make sure the kids were protected and well taken care of, and eventually fostered them and adopted them. And actually, the case is the criminal trial is actually going on right now, and the children will testify against the criminal on the 20th of August, day before the primary.
Wow, that's a big week for your family. That's amazing. It's an amazing act that you and your wife decided to do. By the way, the website's dimitriforcongress.com. I want to make sure that everybody knows it. And obviously you can volunteer and donate there. And small dollar donations makes a big difference to Dimitri, because he's also not taking corporate or PAC money. Dimitri for Congress. So let's talk about policy. You say repeal the reckless tax cuts.
Mm-hmm.
would you like all of them? Just bring back corporate taxes from 21 to 35? Would you repeal all the tax cuts?
I think it makes sense to repeal them and start over, because I do agree we could have in theory, a lower corporate tax rate, but you would have to close all the loopholes. And right now they left open all the loopholes and lowered the tax rate to to ridiculously low rate. So I support just repealing them and starting the whole thing over.
Yeah, yesterday or a couple of days ago on the show, we were talking about it's about $1.9 trillion hole in the budget that it put.
Yeah.
Well, that would actually be enough to get rid of all the student loan debt in the country.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, what would we rather have? Liberate all of the people with student loan debt in the country, or just give it all to the rich, like Trump did?
Yeah, or move our economy towards renewable energy, you name it, where we can put $2 trillion into. And to me, like, they sold this whole tax cut deal as a notion that is going to create jobs. Well, it did create some jobs, just in the wrong country. It's creating jobs in China, because that's where our money is going to.
Yeah, and now let's talk about another point you have on your platform about taxes. You want to raise taxes on the oil industry. That's interesting. Do you mean specifically in Alaska or across the country, and what would you do with it as well?
Well, it's more of our state issue. The issue is that our congressman supports the oil industry here in the state and lobbies on its behalf. And locally, our state taxes are so low that we can't even fund schools. We can't fund public schools. We're laying off teachers. We can't fund public safety. So what I'm saying is that when I'm in Congress, I will make sure that to speak up and push for a state government that actually has a fair tax rate on the oil industry.
Well, that reminds me of another famous person from Alaska, Sarah Palin.
Okay.
So because Sarah Palin actually raised taxes on the oil industry.
I see.
And got to have an 80% popularity in Alaska because of that. She took the money and just gave it to the citizens of Alaska. This was the most socialist thing that any governor has done in my lifetime. So is this position popular? Because it's worked before in Alaska.
The issue is that in our state legislature, we have a lot of cronies who actually work for the oil industry. So we have oil industry employees kind of passing these tax cuts to give their bosses and the companies they work for these huge tax breaks. So yeah, I think the people will support a fair tax on the oil industry, especially when these services are being cut.
Yeah, and that's why I care so much about people not taking corporate PAC money, because, well, then we can trust you that you're not secretly working for the oil companies, that you're actually going to vote and work for the people of your district, or in this case, Alaska. So at least one more policy here. Earlier in the Young Turks show, we were talking about the opioid epidemic. You've got that list on your list of priorities as well. What would you do about it? What do you think is the main source of the problem?
The opioid epidemic, of course, I think occurred because of the pharmaceutical companies pushing their drugs. And my wife is a physician, and she saw this effort, the marketing effort, to market these opioids as not habit forming. But overall, I think we need a better healthcare system. That is why I'm campaigning on single-payer Medicare for all. And I think once you have a robust, functional healthcare system that makes healthcare of the American people a priority, it will be a lot easier to tackle something like an opioid epidemic. So
you're endorsed by Our Revolution and then Our Revolution Alaska as well, Progressive Democrats of America. It goes on. I'm amused that you also put an endorsement of Santa Claus. Nicely done.
Yeah, like he was one of my first endorsements, and the first one is the most special one.
Yeah. So you were apparently on the good list for him.
Not on the naughty list.
No. Don Young might have some issues there. Let me ask you what the mainstream press, how they paint progressives such as yourself, because you're for Medicare for all, getting money out of politics. Our Revolution has endorsed you, et cetera. They'll say, well, Alaska's a red state, so shouldn't you pick a more conservative Democrat to try to appeal to Republicans?
Yeah. So my answer to that is we have actually done that for the last 40 years. So why keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result? And the interesting point is that Alaska has the highest healthcare costs in the entire nation. So if you're going to pick a state where to run on the platform of single-payer Medicare for all, Alaska is actually the best state to run on this platform because everybody's being hurt by these insurance companies and the healthcare industry that's out of control.
All right, DimitriForCongress.com. Thank you so much for joining us on Rebel Headquarters.